The deep space research vessel Endeavour drifted through the dark void between stars, its hull gleaming under the distant light of a red dwarf. Inside the ship, the night shift crew worked quietly at their stations. The ship had been out here for 8 months, mapping new star systems and looking for signs of life. Lisa Martinez sat at her communication console, watching the endless stream of data scroll across her screen. She had been monitoring space frequencies for 3 years now, and most nights were the same: static, background radiation, and the occasional signal from other human ships. Nothing exciting ever happened during the graveyard shift. Then something changed. A new signal appeared on her screen, different from anything she had seen before. It was not coming from any human frequency. The pattern was strange, almost like music, but broken and desperate. Lisa leaned forward, her heart beating faster. She had trained for this moment her entire career. "Captain Thompson to the bridge," she called through the ship's communication system. "We have something." Captain Jake Thompson arrived within minutes, still putting on his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, a veteran of 20 years in deep space. He had seen action in the Outer Rim conflicts and knew the difference between routine signals and something important. "What do you have, Martinez?" he asked, looking at her screen. "Unknown signal, Captain. It's not human, and it's not in any database we have. The pattern suggests it might be a distress call." Thompson studied the waveforms on the screen. The signal was weak, coming from somewhere far away. It pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat, but irregular, like something was wrong. "Can you clean it up?" he asked. Lisa worked at her console, adjusting filters and boosting the signal strength. Slowly the static cleared, and they could hear something that made them both freeze. It was a voice, alien but unmistakably desperate. The words were in broken galactic standard, the common language used for trade between species. "Help. Please. Help. They are killing us. Children dying. Please." The voice faded in and out, but the message was clear. Someone was in terrible trouble, and they were calling for help. "Get Dr. Foster up here," Thompson ordered, "and wake up the rest of the senior staff. We need to decode this properly." Dr. Amanda Foster arrived 20 minutes later, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was the ship's expert on alien languages and cultures, a small woman with bright eyes and a quick mind. She had studied every known alien species in the galaxy. "Play it again," she said, settling at a workstation next to Lisa. They listened to the message several times. Each time, Dr. Foster's face grew more serious. She worked quickly, running the words through translation programs and comparing them to known alien languages. "This is from the Cathera," she said finally. "They're a peaceful species from the Celestian system, crystal-based life forms, very advanced but not militaristic. They've never bothered anyone." "What are they saying exactly?" Thompson asked. Dr. Foster played the message again, translating as it went. "They're under attack. The Vorthak Empire has invaded their homeworld. They're asking for help from anyone who can hear them." Thompson felt his blood run cold. He knew about the Vorthak Empire. Every military officer in human space knew about them. They were conquerors who swept across the galaxy, taking what they wanted and destroying what they could not use. They had been expanding their territory for decades, and no one had been able to stop them. "How long has this signal been broadcasting?" he asked. Lisa checked her readings. "At least 6 hours, maybe longer. The signal is very weak, which means it's coming from very far away. The Celestian system is 3 weeks away at maximum speed," Dr. Foster said quietly. "If the Vorthak are there now..." She did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what the Vorthak did to the species they conquered. They were not interested in prisoners or negotiations. They wanted resources, and they would take them by any means necessary. Thompson stood silent for a moment, thinking. The Endeavour was a research ship, not a warship. They had a crew of 200 scientists and support staff, but only basic, defensive weapons. They could not fight the Vorthak Empire, but they could not ignore this either. "Continue monitoring the signal," he ordered. "I want to know everything about what's happening there, and send a message to Earth Command. They need to know about this." Over the next few hours, more of the alien message became clear. The Cathera were not just under attack, they were being systematically destroyed. The Vorthak had surrounded their planet and were conducting what could only be called genocide. The crystal beings were being hunted down and killed, their cities destroyed, their culture erased. But there was something worse. The Cathera were not being killed quickly. The Vorthak were keeping many of them alive, using them for experiments. The alien voices spoke of torture, of their people being taken to strange facilities where horrible things were done to them. Dr. Foster worked through the night, decoding more of the message. What she learned made her sick. The Vorthak were testing new weapons on the Cathera, seeing how much pain the crystal beings could endure before they died. They were separating families, forcing parents to watch their children suffer. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "you need to hear this." She played a new section of the message. This time the voice was different, younger. It was a Cathera child crying for its parents. The words were simple but heartbreaking. "Mama, Papa, where are you? It hurts. Please make it stop." Thompson closed his eyes. He had seen war before, had fought in battles where good people died. But this was different. This was not war. It was cruelty for its own sake. "What did Earth Command say?" he asked. Lisa looked up from her console. "They acknowledge receipt of our message. They're reviewing the situation and will send instructions within 72 hours. Thompson laughed bitterly. 72 hours. By then, how many more Cathera would be dead? How many more children would cry for parents who could not save them? He looked around the bridge at his crew. These were good people, scientists and explorers who had joined the space service to discover new worlds and make contact with new species. They had not signed up to ignore genocide. "Plot a course for the Celestian system," he said. "Captain?" Lisa asked, surprised. "You heard me. Best possible speed." Dr. Foster looked up from her work. "Captain, we don't have orders to—" "We have everything we need," Thompson interrupted. "We have a distress call from innocent people who are being murdered. That's enough for me." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. They were a single research ship going up against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They would probably die, and they certainly could not save the Cathera by themselves. But they could try. And sometimes, Thompson thought, trying was enough. The Endeavor changed course, turning toward the Celestian system and whatever waited for them there. Behind them, the alien distress signal continued to broadcast into the void, carrying the desperate pleas of a dying species to anyone who would listen. In 3 weeks they would arrive at Celestian. What they would find there would change everything, not just for the crew of the Endeavor, but for all of humanity. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone threatened the innocent while humans were watching. But for now, they flew through the darkness, carrying hope to a world that had almost given up. The news of the alien distress call spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within days, every major species in the Galactic Federation knew about the Cathera situation. The response was exactly what Captain Thompson had feared. It would be. On the neutral world of Nexus Prime, the Federation Council met in emergency session. The Great Assembly Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all talking at once in their various languages. The universal translators worked overtime, creating a chaos of overlapping voices. Ambassador Helen Rodriguez sat at the human delegation table, watching the other representatives with growing frustration. She was a career diplomat who had spent 15 years dealing with galactic politics, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium was worried about their shipping routes. Their representative, a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms, kept talking about trade disruptions and profit margins. The Cathera system was on a major trade route, and any military action there would affect commerce throughout that sector. "We must consider the economic implications," the Zephyrian said, his voice high and musical. "The Vorthak Empire is a significant trading partner. We cannot simply ignore our business relationships," Helen wanted to scream. While they talked about money, people were dying. The militant hegemony of Korath had a different concern. Their representative was a massive insect-like creature with armor plating and multiple eyes. The Korath were warriors by nature, but they were also practical. This could be an opportunity to test new weapon systems. The Korath delegate clicked through his translator. We have been looking for a suitable target for field trials. Even worse than the Zephyrians, Helen thought. At least the trade consortium was being honest about their greed. The Korath wanted to use the Cathara tragedy as a weapons testing ground. But the worst response came from the ethereal collective. These ancient beings considered themselves above the concerns of younger species. Their representative was a floating mass of energy that rarely bothered to communicate with other life forms. All species face extinction eventually, the ethereal said, its voice like wind through empty spaces. This is the natural order of the galaxy. To interfere would be to disrupt the flow of evolution. Helen stood up, her face red with anger. Natural order? The Vorthak are systematically torturing and murdering innocent people. How is that natural? The other delegates turned to look at her. Humans were still relatively new to galactic politics, and many species considered them to be emotional and unpredictable. Ambassador Rodriguez, the session moderator, said, "Please, remember that we must consider all perspectives in this matter." All perspectives? Helen's voice rose. What perspective makes it acceptable to torture children? She activated her personal display and showed the images that had been transmitted from the Celestian system. The assembled delegates saw the Cathara processing facilities, the crystal beings being dragged into experimental chambers, the children separated from their parents. The reaction was immediate, but not what Helen had hoped for. Some delegates looked away in disgust. Others began arguing about the authenticity of the images. The Zephyrians questioned whether this was human propaganda designed to start a war. These images could be fabricated, the Zephyrian representative said. Humans are known for their emotional responses to conflict situations. Helen felt something break inside her. These beings were looking at evidence of genocide and worrying about whether it was real or whether it might hurt their business deals. Meanwhile, in human space, Admiral Carlos Rivera was dealing with a very different kind of problem. As commander of the Human Defense Fleet, he was receiving reports from scouts and intelligence operatives throughout the galaxy. What they were telling him was far worse than what the Federation delegates were seeing. The Vorthak Empire had not just invaded the Cathara homeworld, they had built massive industrial facilities there, designed specifically for processing organic beings. The crystal-based Cathara were being broken down into their component elements, their life essence extracted for use in Vorthak biological weapons. But that was not the worst part. The Vorthak were keeping many Cathara alive during the process, studying their pain responses and testing the limits of their endurance. They were conducting experiments that had no scientific value except to measure suffering. Rivera had seen combat in 3 different wars, but the intelligence reports from Celestian made him physically sick. He had to stop reading several times to compose himself. The scout ship Mercury had managed to get close enough to the Cathara system to record video transmissions. The footage showed Cathara families being separated at the processing centers. Parents were forced to watch their children being taken away, knowing they would never see them again. One recording showed a young Cathara, barely more than a child by their species standards, calling out for its parents as Vorthak soldiers dragged it toward an experimental facility. The crystal being's light was flickering with fear and pain, and its voice was breaking as it cried. Rivera turned off the recording and sat in silence for several minutes. He had daughters of his own, and he could not imagine watching them suffer like that. His communication officer entered the room with another report. "Admiral, we have a response from the Federation Council." Rivera read the official Federation response with growing disbelief. After 3 days of debate, they had authorized a fact-finding mission to arrive at the Cathara system in 6 months. After that, they would consider possible economic sanctions against the Vorthak Empire. 6 months. By then, there would be no Cathara left to save. "Get me President Santos," Rivera ordered. The call was put through immediately. President Maria Santos appeared on the screen, her face tired but determined. She had been in emergency meetings for the past week dealing with the crisis and the Federation's inadequate response. "I've seen the Federation decision," she said before Rivera could speak. "It's not acceptable." "What are our options, Madam President?" Rivera asked. Santos was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the political implications of what they were considering. Acting without Federation approval would make humanity outcasts in galactic politics, but doing nothing would make them something worse. "Admiral, what would it take to mount a rescue operation?" Rivera had been preparing for this question. "We would need to commit significant resources. The Vorthak have a strong military presence in that system. A rescue mission would effectively be a declaration of war." "How many ships would you need?" "All of them," Rivera said without hesitation. "Every vessel we can put into space. This would not be a limited engagement. If we do this, we do it with everything we have." Santos nodded slowly. She had made her decision, but she wanted to hear it from someone else first. "Admiral, in your professional opinion, what should we do?" Rivera looked directly into the camera. His voice was steady and clear. "We save them, Madam President, whatever the cost." Back on Nexus Prime, the Federation Council continued to debate. The Zephyrians proposed forming a committee to study the situation. The Korath suggested waiting to see if the Vorthak would negotiate. The Ethereals recommended doing nothing at all. Helen Rodriguez sat through hours of meaningless discussion, watching civilized beings find excuses for ignoring genocide. Finally, she could not take any more. "The human delegation withdraws from these discussions," she announced, standing up from her chair. The assembly hall fell silent. It was unprecedented for a species to withdraw from an active Federation debate. "Ambassador Rodriguez," the moderator said, "you cannot simply leave. We are following proper procedures." Helen looked around the room at all the delegates who had spent days finding reasons not to act. "Your procedures are worth nothing if they cannot save innocent lives. While you debate, people are dying." She walked out of the hall, leaving the other delegates to continue their endless discussions. Behind her, she could hear them starting to argue about the proper protocol for handling a walkout, but Helen was no longer listening. She had work to do. Humanity had made its choice, and it was time to act. The galaxy was about to learn something new about the species from Earth. When humans saw innocents being tortured and killed, they did not form committees or debate procedures. They picked up weapons and went to war. The Federation could continue talking. Humanity was done listening. The footage arrived on Earth through channels that the government could not control. Peter Kim, a freelance journalist working the night shift at Global News Network, received the encrypted data package from an unknown source. When he opened it, he immediately knew his life had just changed forever. The video was raw, unedited footage from inside the Vorthak processing facilities on Celestian. Peter had covered wars and disasters for 10 years, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw on his screen. Cathara children, their crystal bodies dim with fear and pain, were being separated from their parents. The adult Cathara were trying to protect their young, but the Vorthak soldiers were too strong. The crystal beings made sounds that needed no translation. They were screaming. Peter watched a young Cathara being dragged into what looked like a laboratory. Through the transparent walls, he could see other crystal beings strapped to tables while Vorthak scientists performed experiments on them. The victims were still alive, their bodies pulsing with weak light as they endured procedures that were clearly causing tremendous pain. His hands were shaking as he copied the files to multiple secure servers. The government would try to stop this from being broadcast, but Peter had contacts throughout the media network. This story was going out whether they liked it or not. Within an hour, the footage was playing on every major news channel across human space. Earth, Mars, the asteroid colonies, the outer settlements. Everyone saw the same horrific images at the same time. The reaction was immediate and unlike anything in human history. On Earth, people poured into the streets, not to protest or demonstrate, but to demand action. In New York, London, Tokyo, and every other major city, crowds gathered outside government buildings. They were not angry crowds. They were something much more dangerous. They were united. Betty Walsh, a teacher from Ohio, stood in front of the White House with tears streaming down her face. She held a sign that read, "Save them," in simple black letters. Around her, thousands of other people held similar signs. They were not shouting or chanting. They were simply standing there, waiting for their government to do the right thing. On Mars, construction workers stopped their jobs and marched to the Colonial Administration Building. Jack Morrison, a mining engineer who had never been political in his life, found himself speaking to a crowd of 10,000 people. "I have kids," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I look at those Cathara children, and I see my own kids. We cannot let this happen. We cannot let them die while we do nothing." The crowd did not cheer. They nodded. This was not about politics or territory or trade agreements. This was about something more basic than that. In the asteroid belt, miners and station workers held vigils for the Cathara. They floated in their work suits outside their stations, holding lights in memory of the crystal beings who were dying. Light years away, the outer colonies, usually too busy with survival to worry about galactic politics, sent a joint message to Earth. It was short and simple. "We stand ready." President Maria Santos watched the reports from around human space. Her advisors were telling her about the political risks of military action, the economic costs, the diplomatic consequences. But every time she looked at the screens showing her people united in grief and determination, she knew none of that mattered. "Get me General Clark," she said. General Ryan Clark had been preparing for this moment since the crisis began. As commander of the human war machine, he knew exactly what it would take to mount an operation against the Vorthak Empire. The numbers were not encouraging. "Madam President, we can put together a force of about 800 combat vessels. The Vorthak have at least 3 times that number in the Celestian system alone." "Can we win?" Santos asked directly. Clark was quiet for a moment. "Not in a conventional engagement, but humans do not fight conventional wars." Santos understood. Throughout human history, when facing impossible odds, humans had found ways to win that their enemies never expected. They adapted, improvised, and fought with a desperation that civilized species could not match. "What do you need?" she asked. "Everything," Clark replied. "Every ship, every weapon, every person who can hold a tool or fire a gun, and I need them in 3 weeks." Santos nodded. "You have it." The mobilization that followed was unprecedented in human history. Shipyards across the solar system stopped all civilian production and switched to military vessels. The Luna shipyards, normally used for building cargo haulers and passenger ships, began turning out destroyers and assault craft. Workers volunteered for 18-hour shifts without being asked. Factories that had never produced weapons began, manufacturing guns, ammunition, and military equipment. Civilian ships were converted to troop transports and supply vessels. But it was not just about equipment. The entire human population seemed to move with a single purpose. Volunteers lined up at recruitment centers on every world-end station. Men and women who had never served in the military demanded to be trained for combat. Danny Cooper, a farmer from the agricultural colonies, showed up at his local recruitment center with his 3 adult sons. The recruiting sergeant looked at the family with confusion. "Sir, you are 55 years old and your boys have no military experience. This is going to be combat, not a training exercise." Danny looked the sergeant in the eye. "Those Cathara children do not have military experience either. But they are dying anyway, we want to help." The sergeant signed them up. Stories like this were happening everywhere. Dr. Nancy Price, a pediatric surgeon, volunteered to serve as a combat medic. When asked why she would leave her safe hospital job to go to war, her answer was simple. "I save children for a living. Right now there are children who need saving and they are not on Earth." The other galactic species watched the human mobilization with growing alarm. The Zephyrians sent diplomatic messages expressing concern about human aggression. The Korath offered to mediate the situation. The Ethereals warned about the dangers of emotional decision-making. None of the messages were answered. Humanity was too busy preparing for war. Admiral Rivera moved his headquarters to the military station at Jupiter. From there, he coordinated the largest military operation in human history. Ships arrived daily from every corner of human space. Not just military vessels, but civilian ships that had been armed and converted for war. The merchant marine volunteered their cargo ships to carry supplies. The asteroid miners brought their heavy equipment haulers, modified with weapons and armor. Even the luxury cruise ships were converted to troop transports, but the most impressive sight was the volunteers themselves. They came from every walk of life, every profession, every world where humans lived. They were united by something that the other galactic species could not understand. Lisa Martinez, still aboard the Endeavour as it raced toward Celestian, received a message from her younger brother on Mars. He had joined the fleet as a gunner on a converted mining ship. "I know you started this," the message said. "Thank you for listening when they called for help." Captain Thompson read the message over her shoulder. The old soldier smiled grimly. "They have no idea what they have awakened," he said, referring to the Vorthak Empire. 3 weeks after the footage aired, the human fleet began moving toward the Celestian system. Over 2,000 ships carrying nearly 500,000 humans, all heading toward a battle that would change the galaxy forever. They were not just soldiers and sailors, they were teachers and farmers, doctors and engineers, parents and children. They were humans who had seen innocents suffering and decided that such things could not be allowed to continue. The galaxy had seen human diplomacy and human science. Now it was about to see human war, and nothing would ever be the same. The human fleet arrived at the edge of the Celestian system like a storm front moving across space. Over 2,000 ships of every size and type, from massive battleships to converted cargo haulers, all bristling with weapons and carrying humans who had come to fight. Admiral Rivera stood on the bridge of his flagship Retribution, watching the tactical displays show the Vorthak positions. The enemy had nearly 6,000 ships defending the system, plus massive orbital platforms around the Cathara homeworld. By every rule of space warfare, this should have been impossible for the humans to win. But humans had never been good at following rules. "All ships, this is Admiral Rivera," he broadcast to the entire fleet. "You all know why we are here. 3 weeks ago we heard a cry for help from innocent people who were being murdered. Today we answer that cry." Throughout the fleet, humans prepared for battle. On the converted mining ship New Hope, Danny Cooper and his 3 sons checked their weapons one last time. None of them had military training, but they had spent their lives working with dangerous equipment in hostile environments. War was just another dangerous job. "Remember what we practiced," Danny told his boys. "We are not here to be heroes. We are here to save people." On the medical ship Mercy, Dr. Nancy Price prepared her surgical bay for casualties. She had never operated in a combat zone before, but she had spent years saving children in emergency rooms. This was the same work, just in a different place. The Vorthak fleet moved to intercept the humans, confident in their numerical superiority. Their commander, a massive insectoid creature named Thrakvor, had destroyed dozens of species over his long career. He had never encountered humans in battle before, but he had studied their tactics. They appeared to be a typical civilized species, bound by rules of engagement and concerned about casualties. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The EQ battle began when the human fleet did something that shocked every military observer in the galaxy. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, they scattered into thousands of small groups. Each group used different tactics, as if they were fighting separate wars. Some human ships engaged the Vorthak vessels in conventional combat, trading, fire at long range, but others did things that no civilized species would consider. They rammed enemy ships using their own vessels as guided missiles. They set off explosions inside their own ships to damage nearby enemies. They fought like beings who cared more about winning than surviving. Captain Thompson, aboard the research vessel Endeavour, led a small group of ships toward the planet's surface. Their mission was not to fight the main fleet, but to rescue the surviving Cathara from the processing facilities. "Remember, we are not soldiers," he told his crew over the communication system. "We are rescuers. Our job is to get those people out of there." The Endeavor and 5 other ships broke through the Vorthak defenses around the planet. They had to fight their way through orbital platforms and defense satellites, but they were helped by the fact that most of the enemy fleet was busy with the main battle. On the planet's surface, Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner prepared his rescue team. Turner was a Marine who had volunteered for the mission, along with 50 other humans who had been trained for ground combat. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons designed for close-quarters fighting. The processing facilities are 2 miles from our landing zone, Turner told his team. We go in fast, we get the survivors, and we get out. Anyone who tries to stop us gets put down. The humans landed near the largest Vorthak facility and immediately came under fire. The Vorthak ground forces were expecting an attack, but they were not prepared for human tactics. Instead of advancing in formation, the humans spread out and used the terrain to their advantage. They moved like hunters, using cover and concealment to get close to their enemies. When they engaged the Vorthak soldiers, it was not a battle between armies. It was a series of small, vicious fights where humans used their knowledge of violence to overcome superior numbers. Turner's team reached the processing facility and found scenes that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Thousands of Cathara were imprisoned in holding cells, their crystal bodies dim with pain and fear. Many were injured from the experiments that had been performed on them. Medical teams to the front, Turner called. We need to start moving these people now. Dr. Foster, who had come down with the rescue team, worked quickly to communicate with the surviving Cathara. Many were too traumatized to understand what was happening, but slowly they began to realize that these strange beings were there to help them. We are humans, Dr. Foster said in the Cathara language. We heard your call for help. We are here to take you home. One young Cathara, barely more than a child, approached her cautiously. Its crystal body was cracked and dim, but its voice was clear. Are you really here to save us? It asked. Yes, Dr. Foster replied. We are here to save you. The rescue operation took 6 hours. The humans had to fight their way through Vorthak defenses while carrying thousands of injured and traumatized Cathara to safety. It was dangerous, exhausting work, but every human in the rescue team knew why they were doing it. Meanwhile, the space battle continued to rage above the planet. The Vorthak fleet was learning that humans fought wars differently than any species they had encountered before. When human ships were damaged, they did not retreat. They kept fighting until they were destroyed. When human crews were outnumbered, they did not surrender. They found ways to take their enemies with them. But the most shocking moment came when the Vorthak tried to negotiate. Commander Thrakvor sent a message to Admiral Rivera, offering to discuss terms for ending the battle. Human Admiral, the message said, we are prepared to negotiate a settlement. We can offer territorial concessions and compensation for your losses. Rivera's response was broadcast on all frequencies, so that every ship in both fleets could hear it. We do not negotiate with those who torture children, he said. We erase them. The battle continued until the last Vorthak ship was destroyed or had fled the system. When it was over, the humans had lost nearly 800 vessels and 40,000 people. But they had won a complete victory and, more importantly, they had saved the surviving Cathara. The rescue ships carried 12,000 Cathara survivors back to safety. It was a small number compared to the billions who had lived on Celestian before the Vorthak invasion, but it was 12,000 people who would live to rebuild their civilization. But the humans were not finished. The Vorthak Empire had other worlds, other species that they had conquered and enslaved. Over the following months, human fleets appeared throughout Vorthak space, systematically destroying the Empire's military forces and freeing the enslaved populations. The other galactic species watched in amazement as humanity dismantled one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The humans showed no interest in conquest or territory. They simply destroyed the Vorthak military and left, allowing the freed species to govern themselves. The Galactic Federation, which had spent weeks debating what to do about the Cathara crisis, suddenly found itself dealing with a completely new situation. The Vorthak Empire no longer existed, and dozens of previously enslaved species were now free. Ambassador Helen Rodriguez returned to the Federation Council with a simple message from humanity. "We told you that innocent people were being murdered, and you chose to do nothing," she said to the assembled delegates. "We chose to act. The result is that those people are now free, and those who tormented them are gone." The Federation delegates tried to respond with their usual diplomatic language, talking about proper procedures and the need for approval before taking military action. Helen cut them off. "The next time innocents cry for help, we suggest you listen, because if you do not, we will, and we will not ask for your permission." The galaxy had learned something new about the species from Earth. Humans were not just another civilization, among many. They were something different, something dangerous to those who preyed on the weak. The Deathworlders of Earth had announced their presence, and nothing would ever be the same. From now on, when the strong attacked the weak, they would have to consider whether humans might be listening. And if humans were listening, they would come. They would come with ships and weapons and in fury that had been forged in the crucible of evolution, on a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. The Cathara survivors, safe in human space, sent a message to Earth. It was simple, but profound. "Thank you for hearing our call. Thank you for remembering that some things are more important than politics." Humanity had answered the call. The galaxy would never forget,